Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mariah and here on my channel I post lifestyle, university and physiotherapy related content. So if you're interested in that, subscribe and notification bell to all so you miss a video. So I'm going to do a sit down Q&A because it's the end of uni. I'm no longer a physiotherapy student. I will find out my grades in about a month's time. So in the meantime, let's do a Q&A and I'm going to start off with a nice question of how does it feel to be done? Well, it feels unreal to be done, like in terms of like it feels like I've only recently started, and the 2 years have flown by really quickly. So that's how it feels to be done. But on the other side, I'm so like happy to be done with like assessments and that side of things, like the theoretical written type of things. I'm like, oh, I'm over it. Like university process, I'm over it. Like I'm like, oh, you won't catch me doing a PhD. Like if you ever catch me going back to university, it'll probably be like an online MSc or a part-time thing, if anything. But yeah, so I feel like grateful to be done in that sense. Like it's been a long 6 years in university level education, so like long. And just for those who don't know, I did a sport and exercise science undergrad that I did for 4 years. It's a 3-year course, but because I did a year abroad, it turned it into 4 years. And then took a gap year and then came onto the physiotherapy course. But yeah, that's how I feel about being done. Next question. Was it easy to work alongside the degree? Yes and no. So again, if you don't know, I studied at the University of Birmingham, or study, I guess you can still say, at the University of Birmingham. I'm originally from London, and throughout my degree, I worked in London part-time on the weekends. So it meant every weekend I was driving down to London. Some people are like, that's insane, why don't you just get a job in Birmingham? Because I was happy where I work, so I didn't feel the need to leave somewhere I was happy at to go somewhere else. And also I was getting paid a good wage. And like it didn't make too much difference in terms of the cost of travel, denting it or anything like that. So I was like, it makes sense to stick in the job I'm enjoying. I like the perks, I like the people. So why would I leave for something new in that sense? And it doesn't hinder my degree or anything. So I stayed working. In terms of was it hard to balance? I'd say yes, in terms of when I didn't own a car in my first year, well, majority of my first semester, it was difficult in terms of with trains. I'm not a huge public transport type of person, just in terms of people just annoy me, public transport, and like I'm very much a this is where I'm meant to be at this time type of person. So when I get to a train station and like a train is delayed and they can't give me a specific time about when the train's gonna run, it just bugs me because I'm like, I need to be here at this time, and then by pushing it, I'm doing this and then that, and it's just kind of how I am. I just stress myself out in that sense. So that was annoying about being in public transport. So that added like extra stress. But then the good thing about working and taking the train was that I could work on the train. In terms of the car perspective, much happier driving. I think it was like what, just under 3 hours. You can do in 2.5 hours depending on how you're driving. And the time you're driving at. So I preferred that. Obviously you got traffic and all that, and that meant time I couldn't spend doing work, obviously, because you're not going to work and drive. But there were times where I was like, oh my god, I could do with having this weekend off to focus on this assignment. But then in terms of overall, I would say the stress I dealt with in terms of traveling back and forth to the job was totally worth it, in terms of the fact that it gave me the, like, not just the money, but like provided me with the links to be able to travel as much as I have throughout this degree. And that helped me mentally, like, get through so many things by working in the hostels I've worked in. I've traveled so much, I've met so many new people, it's kept me grounded, I suppose, in that sense. Anyway, moving on to another question. Ooh, we got some good ones here. Okay, has the MSc fit up to my expectations? Now, that one's a hard one to answer, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm probably gonna have to answer this in more depth at a later point when I review the University of Birmingham in a video, just because it's a long-winded answer. But my answer is a yes and no. In terms of the content of the degree, that I'm leaning more to no. In terms of like the theoretical aspect, I'm leaning more no, because I just because of the name of the university, I kind of expected more in that sense. But then in terms of, do I feel like I'm coming away with tools that I can survive with and build upon independently? Yes. Then I would say yes, it lived up to my expectations. In terms of the university itself and the support I got, did it live up to my expectations? Not all the time. Is the best way to answer it. Like I said, it's a question I'm gonna have to answer in more depth at a later point once I've had more to think about. But yeah, that's my view on that one. Okay, let's go with the fun one. What's my favorite and my least favorite placement? So it's harder to answer my favorite placement because there's so many different categories that a placement could be awesome for. But off the cuff, I'd say my least favorite placement was TNO. I say that because, like, trauma and orthopedics is, don't get me wrong, I find trauma pretty interesting. I never did trauma. I feel like if I did trauma, I would be like, whoa, this is cool. I did elective orthopedics, and for me, there's only so many hip and knee and shoulder, etc. replacements I can see before I get to a point where I'm a bit like, okay, I've seen it. And not to downplay what the people do, like, because the physios do a lot, but for me, even though I like having a schedule in my personal life and being like, this is what I'm doing here and this is what I'm doing then, for me, the role became a little repetitive in terms of, because there's obviously protocols on how a person is meant to be rehabbed. There's a protocol for each day typically in some of the cases, where it'll be like, these are specific exercises, or this is what you do day 0, this is what you do day 1, this is what you do da da da. So it felt like every day when I had a new patient, it would be like I'm doing the same thing just with a new face, and after a while I was a bit like, I'm done. And I was only a 4-week placement, and I was just like, I can't with this. In terms of favorite, if we're judging purely based on placement content alone, nothing to do with the team or the location, etc. I would have to say A&E, my urgent care placement, just based off the placement itself. Like, I've enjoyed so many other placements as well, but in terms of the rush you get in A&E, the fact that I see so many people in one day, every case is slightly different. I'm up and down AMU, or I'm going to a trolley one minute, I'm going to a bay the next minute. That, for me, I was like, really love A&E. So I say that's my favorite placement. To answer that question. Let's see, what other things we got here? Okay, what's the biggest challenge coming from a sport and science degree? What was my biggest challenge coming from a sports science degree? I would say that my biggest challenge would be not knowing practical aspects that the sports therapist knew, because the courses, sports therapy and sport and exercise science, were so similar in the first year because you learn pretty much the same content, and then when you went from the second year onwards is where they got more practical and we became more lab based. And for me, I felt like going into the physio degree, I was like, I got this, I got these knowledge, and I got this extra things that, you know, other people don't have, like in terms of like the psychology, the biomechanics, etc. But then they had I know, not that I didn't know where muscles were, but like I didn't have to know where muscles were, like off the top of my head, just like that. Like if you're a sports therapist, you're expected to know that kind of stuff. So like they knew how to do this, they had seen certain massage techniques before, they'd seen certain therapy techniques before, like they were more exposed to it. So initially I would say that was the biggest challenge, like trying to wrap my head around how, like hand placement, little things like that. So they had an advantage on that. So that was my biggest challenge, I would say, coming from a sports science degree. Do I have any revision tips that worked for me? Now I'm gonna be honest with you. I revised a lot in my first year. Second year, I fell off. And I fell off because I was so focused on placements and focused on other things that I revised when I needed to revise. And in terms of, when it comes to me revising, I feel like I revise better by doing versus sitting down and reading through something. Like, so as you would have seen in my first year, I used Anki. Loved Anki. I'm probably going to go back onto Anki because it was nice having the flashcards in the morning, you know, sit there for maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes, depending on how many flashcards I have, and go through them. So I advise using Anki if you're good at flashcards and that works for you. The only thing with Anki versus Quizlet's easier to set up. Anki takes a little bit more time, but I think Anki you can personalize them a little bit more, in my opinion. But yeah, I fell off in that sense, and don't get me wrong, it came to bite me a few times, but I've had a lot going on that I just couldn't maintain it. Another thing is, you know, meeting up with like friends and trying to do practical things. And like most people did it closer to the assessment period, but like whether it's like you have 4 friends and you're like, okay, so give me a technique to do this, or give me a technique for that, like what's an accessory movement for this, and then like you perform it on each other, then you build up your techniques, or perform it on your partner, perform it on like something at home, or you know, even your housemates. Sometimes I know there's some people who on my course live together and they perform techniques on each other in the house. Like it's a way of practicing as well, if you're not just a person who can just read it off a book, for example. So yeah, that's a technique there. 1 minute. Sorry. Okay. Do I think there are a lot of job opportunities in the NHS or in private care? So, as I said before, like I'm more of an NHS type of person. Nothing against private care, it's just not for me at this point in time. Yeah, in terms of job opportunities, I think it depends on how you want to face it. I feel like private care, depending on the speciality of physio that you're intending on going into, based off what I've seen and what I've heard, it's harder to get into certain areas, like sports, for example. Like it's harder to get into those specific areas without your connections. If you don't have connections, getting your foot in the door is, like, you know, difficult. Versus NHS is not as hard if you don't have connections, and NHS doesn't really. If you have connections, don't get me wrong, it's like, oh, you may get a heads up that a job's, you know, dropping, but it doesn't mean you're gonna get hired. You know what I mean? Like it's more fair in that sense. In terms of getting experience for the jobs, it's easier in the NHS, I'd say. But again, depends on who you know, depends on where you're going, depends on the field that you're trying to go into. So don't take my word for it, but that's just my opinion on what I've heard in that sense. How did I manage being on the 2-year condensed course? Now for me, I had to manage. Like, it doesn't how I managed, like I said before, it was by like doing other things. So like working has helped me manage because I wasn't using the same, I don't want to say same parts of my brain, but like I wasn't using the same thought process at work that I was using in placement or at university. Like loads of people in my course, from what I heard, did like work related to either like something they want to go into, or like work related. There's like a sports support worker in like a hospital or something like that. I just didn't want to be in the same environment constantly, and as we know, the NHS likes to burn people out. And it's not necessarily their fault, but like people burn out, and I didn't want to burn out early before I even hit the ground running. So I was like, yeah, let me pick a different field, and it was like actually relaxing, and I looked forward to going to work. So then I didn't have to think about placement. Oh, I didn't have to think about being in a hospital and being in that environment constantly. But what works for me doesn't necessarily work for everybody. So that helped me get through the condensed course. I would say another thing that helped is obviously taking holidays, taking that time out, taking those breaks. And also knowing that my goal is at the end of the tunnel. Like, I've been saying to people recently that, don't get me wrong, I'm gonna be happy the day I walk across the stage and I graduate. But, like, and that won't be until the end of the year though. But for me, I was actually more excited to graduate my undergrad than I am this degree. Because, one, it was more years of my undergrad. I worked harder in my undergrad. And I feel like because it was more time and everything, and how hard it was for me to get into the course and everything, it just felt like it would have been more of a, wow, I made it type of moment in the undergrad, versus now that I'm like, don't get me wrong, I'm grateful that I'm like, also, wow, I got into this course and I can't believe I managed to do the 2 years condensed course and I'm at this point now. But I feel like I'm going to be actually more excited when HCPC drops me an email, drops me a letter being like, hey, you're a registered physio. That for me is going to be like a, woo, I made it, versus my cat, my gown walking across the stage. I'm going to graduation, best believe I'm going, because I didn't get to go in my undergrad. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel about how I managed to get through the course, just knowing that I had that light at the end of the tunnel and that it was all worth it. The stress that I was going through at that point in time was going to be worth it in the end. Yeah, that's how I got through the 2 years of the course. Other question have you guys got here for me? Okay. Why have you applied for rotations versus static roles? So, for me, even though, like, from the start of the degree, I was like, I'm a neuro person. Like, I really like neuro. I like the neurological conditions, etc. And when I went on my mental health placement, I really enjoyed it. And I was like, wow, I do actually really like neuro, in that sense. So some people are like, why don't you just apply straight for a neuro role? I don't want to be stuck in a role immediately. Like, I don't want to get all this specialist, like, speciality, depth, etc. in one area and then maybe change my mind. Like, you know what I mean? And right now, most of my placements are respiratory based. Well, have been respiratory based. And I'm really enjoying respiratory as well. So we'll see. And then with factors like in uni, outside uni, etc., like, I'm leaning more to respiratory at this point in time. But if there's a way of, like, if I can combine the two, I'm gonna really enjoy that. So that's why I've applied more for rotations and static roles. So for me, rotations, obviously, like, you get to rotate in different specialities and get exposure to different things. And I feel like it's nice to get that exposure to different areas that you wouldn't be in if you went straight to static. And you can, don't get me wrong, you can do rotations within specific core areas. Like, I've heard that static roles, you may be based is like a, I don't want to say MSK, but like, you may be, like, let's say MSK for example. You may be an MSK Physio, but there may be mini rotations with MSK. So just because it says static, don't take my word for it, because it really depends on the trust and depending on the role. So always read in the job description. But it may be like, oh, I've applied to be a static MSK Physio, but I may spend some time on ortho, I may spend some time in outpatients, I may spend some time doing some inpatient stuff, like it, or even community. You're still doing mini rotations. It just really depends on what's best for you. And for rotations as well, what I like personally is that you have the month snippets, and it kind of reminds me of like student placement. Being able to be in somewhere for a certain amount of time, to check something out, get a little exposure to it, and build up my portfolio really. So that's kind of why I've been applying for those ones. Anyway, what's the next one? Yeah, I did that question. Okay, so the last question is, what type of content will we be seeing from you when you're finished with your degree? So that one's a hard one. So obviously you guys are going to see things like when I get my grades, you're going to see me graduate, because I'm definitely vlogging my graduation. I need to cough 1 minute. So you're going to get to see all of those things. I don't know what's going to happen once I start, I get a job, I start working, etc. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of the frequency of my content. Realistically, it's not going to be every week like it currently is, just because I doubt I'll be able to maintain that. I think things will obviously take a turn more to the lifestyle side of things. I'll still give you advice on like physio related stuff. I don't want to go down, however, I don't want to go down the path of being like, if you have this condition, da 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 da, or da 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 da. Like, I don't want to do that. I do want to do things being like, hey, you know, I've just had this rotation, so here's my first day on this rotation, this is what I've got up to, giving those little updates, kind of like what I do on placement currently, but with a bit more boom with it. But like I said, it's mostly probably going to be like, you're going to see my travel stuff. I'm taking a big trip at the end of the degree, like for summer. I've got some other trips booked from that point on, so you're probably going to see quite a bit of that. But we'll see how we go until the end of the year. We'll see where we go, and we'll just see how life goes with me, and I'll take you along every step of the way, and then yeah. But if there's anything specific you guys actually want to see from me, or any questions you feel like I haven't answered in here and you want me to do another Q&A, obviously leave them down below and I'll be happy to answer them for you. Or yeah, if there's enough questions, I'll just make another Q&A. But yeah, that's kind of all I can say about that. Is like, things will be changing, but I will still be happy to provide advice and share my experiences with you guys. But yeah, that's a wrap. So I'll catch you guys in another video. If you enjoyed it, thumbs up, and I'll see you there. Bye guys.